In the modern age of comic books, the idea of the anti-hero feels common. Characters who existed between hero and villain dominate comics today. Wolverine, the Punisher, Magneto, Doctor Doom. But decades before Marvel would become famous for its morally complex characters, before the term anti-hero even existed in comic storytelling, one character was already defining what that meant. That character was Namor the Sub-Mariner. Created before Captain America, before the Fantastic Four, even before Marvel Comics itself existed in its modern form. Namor is not just one of Marvel's oldest characters. He is one of the first Marvel characters. A king, a mutant, an avenger, an invader, a hero, and sometimes a villain. His story is not just the story of Atlantis. It's the story of how comic books themselves evolved from simple adventure stories into complex character dramas. Today, we are going to examine the creation of Namor, his evolution through the decades, his biggest storylines, his personality changes, his influence on Marvel history, and why this strange, arrogant, complicated character remains one of the most important figures Marvel has ever created. This is the complete history of Namor the Sub-Mariner. To understand Namor, we have to go back to 1939. Before Marvel Comics existed, the company was called Timely Comics. And one of the most important figures in early comic book history was a man named Bill Everett. Everett wasn't just an artist, he was something rare for the time. A creator who wrote and drew his own character with a strong personal vision. Namor was originally created for the unpublished comic called Motion Picture Funnies Weekly, a promotional giveaway that never reached wide distribution, but Timely saw potential. Later that same year, Namor would officially debut in Marvel Comics Issue 1. This makes him one of Marvel's first ever characters, alongside the Human Torch, the original Android version, and together they would define Marvel's earliest storytelling. But what made Namor revolutionary wasn't just that he was powerful, it was his personality. Because Namor wasn't created to be a traditional hero, he was created to be dangerous. In the late 1930s, comic heroes were simple, they were good. Villains were bad, the morality was clear. Namor broke that formula immediately. His original motivation? Revenge against humanity. His story begins with the discovery that humans were polluting the oceans and threatening Atlantis, so Namor declares war on the surface world. Think about how radical that was for 1939. He wasn't protecting humans, he was threatening them. Namor was essentially one of comics' first environmental characters, one of comics' first anti-heroes, one of comics' first morally grey protagonists. Bill Everett intentionally wrote Namor as arrogant and emotional. He wasn't meant to be likable, he was meant to feel real. Everett once described him as having royal pride, a violent temper, and a sense of superiority. Namor believed he was better than humans, and in many ways, that idea still defines the character today. What actually makes Namor dangerous? Because on paper, his powers sound simple: super strength, flight, water breathing, but the details matter. Namor is one of Marvel's earliest mutants, though this label was applied retroactively decades later. His mutation gives him something unusual, the small rings on his ankles. And yes, those rings actually allow him to fly. This strange visual choice became one of the most recognizable parts of his design because it perfectly captures how different early comics were. Modern comics might try to scientifically explain it. Golden Age comics simply said, he can fly. But Namor's real advantage isn't flight, it's his hybrid physiology. Because Namor is half Atlantean and half human, he gains advantage on both species. Underwater, he becomes vastly stronger. On land, he weakens slowly over time if dehydrated. This creates an interesting storytelling mechanic. Namor isn't just powerful, he's situationally powerful. Near oceans, he's nearly unstoppable. Deep underwater, he is comparable to Marvel's strongest heroes. This has allowed writers to realistically challenge him without weakening the character. His abilities typically include super strength underwater, extreme durability, accelerated healing, longevity, master hand-to-hand combat, and political authority over Atlantis. But perhaps his most dangerous ability is rarely listed on the power charts: his willingness to escalate conflict. Namor is often the first character willing to say, if diplomacy fails, what comes next? And that makes him dangerous in ways strength alone cannot be measured. During the 1940s, Namor became one of Timely's biggest stars. His early stories were wild Golden Age adventures. He fought Nazis, mad scientists, sea monsters, dictators, and frequently Human Torch. Their rivalry became one of comics' first major hero versus hero conflicts. Namor was still technically a protagonist, but he was unpredictable. Sometimes he helped humanity, sometimes he attacked it, and this unpredictability made him fascinating. During World War II, his character shifted slightly. Like many heroes of the era, Namor began fighting the Axis powers. But unlike Captain America, his motivation wasn't patriotism, it was personal anger. If the Nazis threatened Atlantis, they became his enemies. Not because he loved America, because he protected his kingdom. This established one of Namor's most important defining traits. Namor is loyal to Atlantis first, always. Not the Avengers, not the Fantastic Four, not humanity. Atlantis. This idea would define his stories for the next 80 years. No discussion of Namor would be complete without addressing the comparison everyone eventually makes: Aquaman. Created 2 years later in 1941, Aquaman and Namor share obvious similarities: Atlantean rulers, ocean protectors, super strength. But their personalities could not be more different. Aquaman represents ideal kingship. He seeks peace first, cooperation second, force last. Namor represents something more ancient, the idea of a warrior king. Namor believes peace exists because strength enforces it. Aquaman believes strength exists to preserve peace. This philosophical difference explains why Namor often feels more dangerous. Aquaman is written as hero first. Namor is written as ruler first. This is why Namor sometimes reads closer to characters like Doctor Doom. They share pride, national loyalty, personal honor codes, explosive tempers. But where Doom seeks control, Namor seeks survival. And that distinction keeps Namor from becoming a full villain. Like many Golden Age characters, Namor faded in the 1950s. Superhero popularity declined. Horror and Western comics took over. Timely Comics became Atlas Comics. Namor disappeared from publication for almost a decade. But this disappearance would accidentally help his character later, because when Marvel brought him back, they could reinvent him.
The good life on the whole that we enjoy in the 20th century. Superlatively good was that day when the young Duke of Kent married Miss Catherine Worsley. UN Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld, working for peace in another way, was killed.
What is going on? Me buying jam.
Everything changed in 1961. Marvel. With the creative team now under Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, they launched the book that would redefine comics, Fantastic Four, Issue 1. Marvel's new philosophy was simple. Heroes should feel human, flawed, emotional, complicated. Namor fitted perfectly into this new direction. So in Fantastic Four Issue 4 in 1962, Namor returned. With a twist, Johnny Storm finds a homeless man and throws him into the ocean, and that man remembers who he is. The Sub-Mariner had returned, and this version of Namor would become the definitive one. Now he was more tragic, more bitter, more isolated. Atlantis had been destroyed by nuclear testing. This gave Namor something new: pain. He was no longer just arrogant, he was wounded. This made him perfect for Marvel's new storytelling style. One of the most important developments of the 1960s was Namor's obsession with Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman. Namor became fascinated with her strength and compassion. This created one of Marvel's earliest romantic tensions, but it also reinforced Namor's tragic nature because he could never have her. Namor was written as a king without peace, a warrior without belonging, a man caught between two worlds. This theme, belonging nowhere, became central to his character. By the 1970s, comics were becoming more mature, and Namor finally found his perfect woe. Not hero, not villain, anti-hero. His solo series explored political responsibility, isolation, environmental themes, the burden of leadership. This era emphasized something modern readers recognized. Namor is exhausted. Being a king isn't glamorous. It's responsibility. He makes hard choices, sometimes brutal ones, and unlike many heroes, he accepts that. This made Namor feel decades ahead of his time. Across every decade, Namor consistently shows pride, honor, temper, loyalty, loneliness. But his biggest trait? Dual identity. Namor is half human, half Atlantean. He belongs fully to neither, and this is why his personality is always conflicted. He wants connections, but pushes people away. He wants peace, but prepares for war. He wants respect, but demands it through fear. This complexity is why writers keep returning to him. Namor is not Marvel's most popular character. He was never meant to be. He is something more interesting. He is one of Marvel's most important characters historically, because Namor represents the moment comics began experimenting with flawed protagonists. Without Namor, Marvel might have never embraced the complex heroes, and without complex heroes, Marvel wouldn't feel like Marvel. But Namor's story doesn't end here in the 1970s, because in the next decades, he would become an Avenger, an Illuminati member, a destroyer of worlds, and one of Marvel's most dangerous kings. By the 1980s, Marvel had a problem with Namor. Writers respected him, historians of comics loved him, but Marvel didn't quite know what to do with him. He wasn't as marketable as Spider-Man. He wasn't as iconic as Captain America. He wasn't as easy to place as the X-Men. Namor existed in a strange place. Too heroic to be a villain, too dangerous to be a traditional hero. But then, one writer solved the problem by leaning into what made Namor unique, instead of trying to make him conventional. That writer was John Byrne, and his 1990 series would redefine Namor for modern readers. Byrne introduced a fascinating idea. What if Namor wasn't just King of Atlantis? What if he was also a corporate power on the surface? Byrne made Namor the head of the Oracle Inc., a corporation dedicated to environmental protection. This did something brilliant. It modernized Namor's original purpose. Remember, Namor started as a character angry about pollution. Byrne brought that idea into the modern world. Namor would fight environmental destructions through politics, economics, power structures. This was decades before superhero comics commonly explored these ideas, and Byrne leaned heavily into Namor's personality flaws. Namor wasn't written as charming, he was written as blunt, proud, impatient, ruthlessly honest. He didn't try to be liked, he expected respect. This is important because Byrne solidified what many now consider Namor's defining personality. He is what Doctor Doom would be if Doom occasionally chose to be heroic. The 1990s pushed comics towards darker storytelling. Anti-heroes dominated the industry. Spawn, Ghost Rider, Venom, The Punisher. Suddenly Namor felt less unusual. In fact, he felt ahead of his time. During this era, Namor was often portrayed as more aggressive and more willing to use force. But something interesting happened. While many characters became darker for style, Namor's darkness always came from responsibility. When Namor used violence, it was usually written at a cost of protecting Atlantis. Not vengeance, but a duty. And that distinction kept him from becoming just another grim 90s character. One of the most important modern developments came when Marvel introduced the Illuminati, a secret council of Marvel's most powerful minds. Members included Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Black Bolt, Professor X, Reed Richards, and Namor. Namor's inclusion says something important. He wasn't there because he was nice. He was there because he was necessary. Namor represents something others lack: brutal realism. In Illuminati stories, Namor often becomes the one willing to say, "What if the heroic solution doesn't work?" This leads directly into one of the darkest Marvel stories ever told. During Jonathan Hickman's Avengers 1, Earth faces a terrifying problem. Parallel universes begin colliding. If two Earths collide, both universes die, unless one Earth is destroyed first. Marvel's heroes face an impossible moral question: destroy another world or lose everything. Most heroes hesitate. Namor does not. Namor becomes one of the few characters willing to cross that line. He helps destroy the alternate Earths to save his own world. And eventually, even the Illuminati reject him. But Namor does something very important here. He accepts being hated, because someone has to make the decision. This may be one of the most important Namor stories ever told, because it proves something fundamental. Namor will sacrifice his reputation to protect his people. Not glory, not approval, survival. This is what separates him from traditional heroes. Another major turning point came during Avengers vs. X-Men, when Namor becomes one of the Phoenix Five. Empowered by the Phoenix Force, Namor attacks Wakanda, flooding the nation. This becomes one of the most controversial acts. It shows something dangerous about Namor. When given godlike power, his anger rises quickly. But again, Marvel avoids making him pure evil, because after losing the Phoenix power, Namor shows regret, not weakness, reflection. In recent Marvel stories, Namor's relationship with Wakanda has become central. His rivalry with Black Panther works because both characters are similar, kings and protectors. But where T'Challa seeks diplomacy, Namor often chooses dominance. They represent two different philosophies of leadership, and Marvel uses this contrast brilliantly. At his core, Namor is not defined by power. He is defined by isolation. He is too human for Atlantis, too proud for friendship, too honourable for villainy. This makes him one of Marvel's most psychologically interesting characters. Namor doesn't want approval, he wants respect, and if he doesn't receive it, he will demand it. Namor is sometimes overlooked today, but historically, he may be one of Marvel's most important experiments, because he proved something very early. Heroes do not need to be perfect. They can be arrogant, difficult, dangerous, and still be heroic. Without Namor, you likely don't get Magneto's moral complexity, Doctor Doom's nobility, Black Panther's royal burden, even characters like Wolverine. Namor helped Marvel discover something essential. Flaws make characters real, and real characters last. Namor has lasted since 1939, not because he's the strongest, but because he's one of the most human. Ironically, for someone who barely considers himself human at all. Namor is not just Marvel's first mutant, not just Marvel's first anti-hero, not just Marvel's first king. He is a reminder of where Marvel began, a bridge between Golden Age simplicity and modern complexity, and perhaps the best example of Marvel's oldest storytelling ideas. Power is easy, responsibility is hard, and no one in Marvel understands that burden quite like the King of Atlantis, Namor the Sub-Mariner.